process, including this issue, to be in the app.
Okay, Simon Fell.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm afraid, Mr. Pickles, I'm going to be sticking with you just for a couple of questions. Going back to Diane Abbott's questions, obviously we've talked about President Trump, but we've had British people as well, British citizens who've been suspended and banned from your platform for sharing offensive content. I'm thinking notably Stephen Yaxley-Lennon. And I'm interested in the issue of profile versus presence on your platform. So, he may have been banned, he may not have a profile, but yet there is content on there which is produced by him, starring him, shared by either puppet accounts, from the ones I've looked at, or his supporters and followers. It's just as harmful as him being there in person. So I'm curious as to your view as to that line between profile and presence, and how you think it should be most effectively acted on, and whether you consider you are effectively acting on it at present.
No, this is one of the biggest challenges we have. Certainly, for example, looking at recent events around the world, people will post content to Twitter to condemn it, to draw attention to it, to say, did you know someone has just said this in another place? And one of the challenges there is then that reproduces the very content from an individual who we have previously banned from Twitter. So we try and draw the line currently around, is an account being created to evade our ban? So we suspend an individual, and then you create an account devoted to only sharing content from that individual, and you call it a fan account. So that would be something where we would look and say, is this content being shared potentially by people connected to the original individual to evade our suspension? So we draw a distinction between, are you evading a ban versus are you sharing this content because it's off-platform commentary, the content itself may not break our rules, and so that balance is the one we're constantly trying to strike, but particularly when people are sharing content to condemn, to raise awareness, we take that context into account. If you share it to praise, to glorify, and the content being shared breaks our rules, or potentially, say, includes a threat of violence or other violations of our rules, we'd remove the content whoever shared it. But this question of sharing content, including from news broadcasters and news organizations around the world, is one that is a very, very hard line, and it's very context specific.
And thank you for that. And I think where I'm most interested is, because obviously sometimes people may film an event, they may share it, and that is part of the news flow, and it's part of what your platforms are there for, whether we sometimes like it or not. But where there is content which is produced specifically for your platform to evade someone who doesn't have a profile, and getting around that block that you've put in place, do you feel you should be more proactive there, or where do you draw that line?
Well, I think we both agree that line is very, very hard to define. And as I say, that the context that the content is shared in is as important as the content itself. But it's something where we certainly don't want to stop people highlighting what's happening off Twitter. But I think we have also seen, for example, individuals that we've taken off Twitter unwittingly being given a voice back on Twitter by people for a variety of reasons. And so this question of allowing people to reshare content that perhaps glorifies, praises, to the chair's previous question, if it was a violent extremist group under our policy and you shared that content to glorify it, then we would remove that content. The challenge, as you say, is individuals who may have particular views that are shared off platform, and then explaining the consistency of sharing it to say this is what someone said. That consistency and that enforcement challenge is something that we continue to look and refine at. But I agree with you, it's a very difficult line to draw, and one that we want to make sure people can hold to account, call out, expose action happening off Twitter. And that's something we continue to keep look at how that's evolving.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll just like to move briefly on to online harms. So I'll give you a break for a second, Mr. Pickles. Obviously, we have the government's online harm proposals out now. It seems likely you'll be classed as category 1, so having to take action on legal but harmful content. What does this mean in practice to you, and what's your just general thoughts on those proposals, bearing in mind our time constraints? Perhaps if we start with you, Mr. Bertram.
Well, we welcome the proposals. I think it's in line with the trend we see globally for regulation of content moderation in the way that historically we've seen content with privacy. Although you say we've seen the proposals, I think there's still some detail to come on that, but we certainly welcome this first step.
Okay, thank you very much. And Mr. Slater.
Yes, thank you. I think similarly, we cautiously welcome what's been put forward. We're still digesting it. We've not waited for regulation in this area. There's a lot of detail still to be sorted out on what defines legal but harmful, what measures need to be taken, what's a risk assessment. Getting those details right is that much more important because of the very significant penalties that are proposed there and the knock-on effects, the unintended consequences that may have to lawful speech, to investment and innovation. So that's something we have to take a very close look at, but we're grateful for the thought that's been put into it and look forward to continuing the conversation going forward.
Thanks. And Mr. Turnbull?
Sure. So in terms of the full government response, we absolutely support the key planks of policy that are outlined there. The idea of principles-based regulation based on a statutory duty of care. We think it's really important that regulation is independent from the immediate political goals of the government of the day. We very much support the proposed role for Ofcom as a trusted, credible regulator. I think, as others have said, plenty more detail to come, particularly in the bill, and we'll need to look at the precise provisions in the bill to determine, which company is in which category, that kind of thing. All I would say on that is that, the key difference, as I understand it, between Category 1 and Category 2 seems to be an obligation to take action against this category of legal but harmful content, fake news, self-harm, etc. Ultimately, these are all things that are already prohibited on our platform and that we already take action against.
Thank you. And last but not least, Mr. Pickles.
Echo the comments from colleagues. I think just to make 3 suggestions where I think the legislation could perhaps be stronger. Firstly, we're all kind of the user side. There is a supply side question of incentives. And so I think one of the questions that isn't in scope right now is, are there financial incentives for bad actors to create disinformation, to create harmful content that is being monetized through the online ecosystem? And I think not addressing the incentives question in online harms to me seems like a missed opportunity. I think secondly, we as Twitter took the decision to ban all political advertising. I think the question of online political advertising regulation still seems to be up in the air. And finally, transparency. Often some of the questions we have with committees like the Home Affairs Committee is around the relationship we have with the CTRU, the National Crime Agency. And I think expanding transparency of government functions in this area, how many requests are sent, how many responses are received, how many platforms are being talked to for those illegal content requests. I think expanding that transparency would help inform the public policy debate more broadly for all of us.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Chair.